I'm Patrick Watson, I'm an astrologer, and you're watching Big Fat Astro Vlog live. And today I'm going to be talking about Venus Retrograde and what it means for you if you are a Scorpio Rising. So here we go. So Venus typically just brings things together, makes things pleasant and sweet and orderly. That's why it's sort of associated with like social order, social boundaries, social bonds, social agreements, what being polite means, etiquette, what's sort of right and proper, that kind of thing. So, when Venus is going direct, it does these things sort of as we'd expect. But when it's going retrograde, which is, it only appears to be going retrograde, between Earth and the Sun, due to its relative motion. It's not actually going backwards, just looks like it is, but in astrology we kind of take a symbolic view of that it's the significations of Venus are similarly going backwards or are somewhat awry or off the rails a bit. So what we typically expect is Venus brings two people together into a committed exclusive relationship, but during Venus retrograde it may do that again. So someone in the relationship will then want to be with someone else, so it's still doing what we kind of expect it to do, but like not in the way that we expect, right? So Venus retrograde is often associated with like scandals, sex scandals, and warped notions of intimacy. So we can actually see this a little bit right now in the news, because there's so much of a focus on sexual assault and sexual crimes and stuff like that. Some of that's the Venus-Mars square stuff, but it otherwise is definitely a very Venus retrograde-y thing for this notion of intimacy to be kind of taken to this kind of dark and unexpected and sordid place of sexual assault. But in any case, let's talk about what this means specifically for you as a Scorpio rising. So, Venus generally means some of those things like, your propensity for love and romance, your aesthetic sensibilities, your what's cherished to you, what's sacred to you, what is beautiful to you. But Venus also takes on a very specific role based on your rising sign. So it's going to have these associations with certain houses, certain topics in your chart. So Libra is one of the signs ruled by Venus, as is Taurus. So let's take a look at both of these. Taurus is your 7th house of partnerships, relationships, and others, your other. So in some ways, Venus is taking on a very natural role, a role that's very natural to it, since it's about, connecting with others, and then it's in the part of your chart that has to do with relationships. So we know that this Venus retrograde will likely have to do with partnerships for you. It is also it also rules your 12th house, which is a house of enemies and rivalries and weaknesses, places that you're taken away to, like the hospital or, prison or an insane asylum, or maybe, less criminally connoted. It may also just be like a place you retreat to, a place where you're invisible to others. So yeah, the 12th is kind of a sad house in some ways, whereas the 7th house is, fairly nice. Everyone likes partnerships. Relationships are very important in our lives. So Venus represents both of these somehow for Scorpio risings, and I think the way to interpret that is that for Scorpio risings, sometimes who you are bonded with, as a partner, can also be the person you are most vulnerable to, the person who you're weakest against. Sometimes it can be literal, like your partners may turn out to be your enemies, or that, eventually your enemies may become your partners. Something like that. Sort of a general thing for Scorpio risings with Venus ruling the 12th and 7th. So in some ways, these topics are connected by wherever Venus is in your chart. Now, Venus is actually going to be transiting through and going retrograde through Scorpio, which is your 1st house. And your 1st house is to do with yourself and your identity, like your self-image. It can sometimes have to do with your appearance and kind of your overall outlook. So this Venus transit should be fairly significant for you because you were born with Scorpio Rising. And that's where Venus is. So in some way, we'd have to say then that, like, you know, the topic of, like, your partnerships as well as, like, your enemies, people who kind of have it out for you, are going to be acting in strange ways when Venus turns retrograde, which it will finally on October 5th officially. And it doesn't go retrograde until November 16th, but right now we're just focusing on where it's going, what it's doing in Scorpio. We can talk about what it does in Libra next month, because it goes into Libra after Halloween. So one way we can interpret this is, you know, this could just be like a time when, you know, a really important relationship comes into your life, but especially one which could be compromising to you. One that may not necessarily build you up. One that might be slightly destructive to you as well. Someone you may not have planned on being with, or someone that you wouldn't necessarily imagine yourself being with. This is, pardon me, this is the kind of relationships that Venus retrograde brings you, and especially since Venus retrograde, Venus rules your 7th house and it's in your 1st house, so somehow this reflects on you, and this is maybe a intense period of reevaluation for you, like who you are as a person, what you value, and who you think you are. So you may have to kind of get over yourself in order for this relationship to continue. But you may also go like, no, I'm not like that. I know I'm attracted to this person, but like it's not right, or there's some other kind of reason, and I'm gonna really not do that. So then maybe when you kind of like, you know, assert yourself and like who you are, what you value. But you know, we know that the pull of attraction is intense, and you know, cannot be so easily warded off. So you may find yourself having to kind of compromise with yourself a little bit in order to kind of have a relationship that you want. But it also comes with some risks, and those are represented, I guess, by Venus's rulership of the 12th. So that's kind of what I have to say in general about this layout with Scorpio rising. You know, Venus is representing this area of the chart that has to do with enemies and to do with partnerships and relationships, and so I think there's a slightly ethically compromised relationship which comes into life, which can also be, you might be vulnerable to, or potentially, you know, causes you to be in a weaker position. But it's something that you also kind of greatly, I guess, enjoy, or is exciting. You know, if you're in a relationship already, you know, you're gonna have to really decide about, you know, what your relationship is going to look like. If you're not with someone, this could just be a new relationship that you're dealing with. So, obviously, these transits can be very personal, but if in some way there's a way you can describe what your transit means to us, I'd be happy to read your story in the comments. If you want to find out more about what if you want to find out more about what this specific retrograde transit will mean for you, I would recommend looking back in time at previous times that Venus was retrograde in Scorpio, because then you kind of get an idea of what it was doing before. So Venus is on an 8-year cycle. So 8 years ago, back in 2010, October to November of 2010, Venus was retrograde. In 2002, it was retrograde, October to November. In 1994, Venus is retrograde in October, November of 1994. So depending on how old you are, you can go back and kind of see what themes have been brought up at these times in your life. And sometimes one retrograde is kind of like a completion of the last one. So maybe like some topic was kind of brought up in the previous Venus retrograde, and then it sort of comes back in some way at the next level, and sort of connects us a progression on that theme as well. So in any case, I wish you the best luck during this Venus retrograde, and I'll see you next time.